And now, here's lesson number 4, entitled, Not Guilty.
It's important for us to stop feeling guilty about anything, to give up the mechanism of guilt. I got so sick and tired being guilty, feeling guilty, years ago, that I decided to do something about it. And before I get too far into the reasons why it's necessary to give up guilt, let me sort of set a stage for us. Every person lives with two conflicting selves within himself or herself. His true self and his false self. It's difficult in the beginning to see that this is so. But if you're having some difficulty believing that at the moment, just take my word for it. Establish it as a premise, as a possibility. Now, the false self in us consists of everything negative. Everything in a person that's negative is a part of your false self or your false personality. The false self in us is the part of us that has caused all of the trouble that we have ever experienced. And it's the part of us that has done all of the suffering that we have ever experienced. Your real self has never suffered, nor can it, nor shall it, ever. The false self in us is made up of everything that is an enemy of happiness. It consists of those attitudes such as envy, feeling of blame, anger, resentment, worry, the critical, judging attitude. It's a part of us that does all the inner talking, talk. That's the false personality. Religions call the false self the devil, or just being sinful. Philosophy sees the false self as the lower nature, and modern psychology calls it the ego self that lives in illusion. But the point is that a person dominated by his false self does not live his life. He is driven through his life. He is hounded by compulsive desires, by angers and resentments over which he or she seems to have no control, and scared by unrealistic imaginings. And the false self is always looking back at the past about what could have been or should have been, or what was missed or what was done that might catch up with it today, and looking toward the future with apprehension, with concern and worry, planning for a future that never comes, trying to find its security in retirement or in settling down. It wants to settle down because it is down. That's the false self. Now, because we identify with this false self and its terrors, its fears, its worries, because we let them live in us and speak their words through us, we begin to believe that that's what we are. A grandfather showed me 49 pictures of his darling newborn girl grandbaby. She is darling. Now, looking at her, you see the happiness. That little child is really alive. Really alive. I could see it. When we are small, very small, the false self has not yet been fully formed. We are closer to what we really are. Can you remember those delicious moments, or have you seen them in a small child recently before it has learned to be fearful and resentful? Do you recall that experience? It's entirely useless for a person to try to change or repair or reform their small self, their lower nature. You can't change it. It won't change. And this is where most people make a mistake. They are always going to do better. But they never do better. I'm going to go to California and I'll do better in California. I know I will. I'll get married and I'll do better. No, wait a minute. I'll get divorced and I'll do better. The false self always has false hopes, doesn't it? Now, the false nature cannot be and need not be changed. If I cannot change this false self of me, then what hope is there for me? There's great hope. And the hope is that I will see it for what it is, take it to task, and begin the process of separating from that small self. Remember that the false self is truly false. But when we believe in it, it acts, or we have the experience of it being real. And for a long time, it's the only reality for us that exists. We cannot see and cannot even dream that there's something higher in us, something that has been called the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heavenliness, or the imprisoned splendor. And yet you have experienced this self in long moments of your life. It keeps coming back like a song, carrying its message to us. So since we possess this true self, our higher nature, there's great hope for us. Primitive man controlled his environment with physical power because the small self believes in overpowering other persons, controlling, and it uses its physical power, if it has it, and surprise, the force of attack. Modern man does much the same thing, or attempts to, with his enemies, another nation in battle, or maybe just another corporation. Modern man goes a step farther, though. The small self in us has learned to dominate and manipulate our immediate environment by controlling friends or foe and family alike through the emotions of fear and guilt. We don't take a stick and beat each other over the head, hardly ever anymore. We have other sticks that we take, other ways that we cause people to be what we want them to be, do what we want them to do, so that we can be happy. Did you hear that? So that we can be happy. There's only one problem with the system. It has never worked. Never shall it work. First place, you cannot control your outer world through fear and guilt, and yet there's not a person who will hear my voice that has not had the continuing experience from the time that you were that little child experiencing the sweetness of your higher self. Time in which you were not being controlled and manipulated through fear and guilt. Well-meaning persons who themselves had been controlled. They learned the system from the experts who preceded them. Now, the real self in us, the spiritual person in us, transcends these negative, destructive emotions and transforms his or her world with love, seeking to control no one except himself. The only person that I need take charge of is me. And the only part of me that I need take charge of is to begin this process of separating from my lower self. I don't even need to try to control it. I want to be rid of it. I want to be free from it. I want to stop expressing the attitudes of that smaller self. Charlie Brown was talking to Snoopy. He said, "You're lucky you're not a wild animal. If you were, you'd have to hunt for your supper. You'd have to attack your prey. Do you think you could do that?" "No, no, no, Snoopy. Kicking a can of dog food isn't quite the same." Why do we keep acting like wild animals, like our primitive self, when there is a larger spiritual self in us? It's important to know that a person cannot advance a single step in his own development unless that person begins to observe and contend with evil emotions. Evil emotions? You mean that I, or you, or we have evil emotions? Of course we do. Evil meaning causing an undesirable condition. And that's one of the definitions for evil in the dictionary. Anything that causes an undesirable condition is evil. And so when we were told that we were evil, this does not mean that our true nature, that our real self was evil. No, not at all. But we have developed, we have concocted, we have accepted and practiced some negative emotional states that are useless. They're self-destruct. And each of them has its own poison. Now, at the bottom of all of these negative emotions lies the violence that we see in the world and the violence that happens to us in our own lives. The first step is to begin to see how bad these negative or evil emotions are in us. We've called them good. We have embraced them. We've actually enjoyed them. You mean you never enjoyed a depression, staying home, listening to sad music, reading a sad book? Never did that? You can taste them. And it's when our lives reach the point that they don't taste so good anymore that it's possible to begin to do something and to change something. Now, throughout our whole lives, the two most futile emotions are guilt for what has been done and worry about what might happen to us now, at this moment, or in the future. When the world finds out what it is that we did that we're now feeling guilty about. Isn't that incredible how that happens to us? The great wastes, worry, and guilt. But then there's another one that's attached to it, because when we begin to feel guilty and worried, we also develop another attitude that is evil, and that is we begin to blame other persons. When our lives don't work out the way we wanted our lives to work out, then we have to find fault, don't we? Because surely it is not our fault. Whoever said it was our fault? Must be someone's fault. Where are they? Oh, I see you. All of you, it is your fault. Guilt means that you use your present moment paralyzed, unable to do anything about what you're guilty about because it is gone. Is there anybody here who can change the past one whit? Of course not. But guilt goes on and on. Do not hear me say that a person should not experience the consequences of their unacceptable behavior. Oh, I have never seen one person on this planet change until they began to experience the consequences of unacceptable, self-defeating behavior. As long as we can cover it and hide it, or have someone to cover it or hide it for us, we won't change. We don't change until we're forced to change by the consequences of our actions. Now, isn't it enough then that I'm going to have to experience the consequences of my actions? But according to the system that's been adopted by the human race, I must also have the double penalty of feeling guilty about my actions. It's incredible, the penance that we take upon ourselves, believing that a person who does not feel guilty is immoral. Did you know that? If someone does not feel guilty, it's almost immoral to not feel guilty. You have felt guilty enough long enough and have a moment of reprieve, just a short moment of reprieve in which there is no guilt. You will feel guilty because there's no guilt. Guilt is defined in the dictionary as the fact of being responsible for an offense or wrongdoing. Yes, I was guilty. I turned my fuzzbuster off, and I was driving 75 miles an hour across the expressway. This didn't really happen. And yes, I was driving 75 miles an hour, and I will take this ticket. But I will not accept the guilt trip that you're putting on me with it. I will take the consequences, but not the guilt. Are you following me? Yes, I did that terrible thing. I did not come home for Thanksgiving with the rest of the family. But I will not accept the guilt. No, no, no. Guilt is defined as remorseful awareness of having done something wrong. Remorseful awareness. Whoever decided that in the first place? Remorseful awareness. Do you know one living human being that has ever changed anything because of their remorse? It is the most self-defeating, silly attitude that ever was created by the human mind. Now, listen to what happens. When we feel guilty, we begin to blame, because we have to hold someone responsible, and then to accuse, and to find fault with, to censure, and then to condemn and to criticize. And the word blame comes from the word which means to blaspheme, and that's what we're actually doing when we're blaming. This is why that I said that these are evil emotions. They cause us to do all kinds of things that most of the time we're not aware that we're doing. It's amazing that most people in the face of great crises are not negative. Have you noticed how that is? One of the most positive times in the history of our nation was when we were attacked just prior to World War II. It was the most critical time probably in the history of our nation. But there was very little negativity or even blame. It was the end of a Great Depression. And suddenly, our nation was no longer depressed. It went into action, and those glorious songs that were written and sung, and our heroes went marching off to battle. Now, this is not a proclamation for war. Don't hear that either. But what I'm saying is that the psychology, the feeling of the nation changed. And you do this, you're usually at your best in a major crisis. Why? Because for a moment, it paralyzes guilt and blame and judgment and the other negative things that are there. You don't have time to be into them. You're into your higher, larger self that's capable of great deeds and great joy. And it does not know anger and resentment and fear and the other attitudes. But then, when we've done great things for a little while, or when our crisis is over, we settle back down into the small parts of our mind and lose our power. Let's take a closer look at guilt. Most of us have been subject to a conspiracy of guilt in our lifetimes. It's almost like an uncalculated plot to control our lives. And that's exactly what it has been. The ego, the little self of the human race, has learned how to control other persons through fear and guilt. You can weigh 96 pounds and be 4 feet and 11 inches tall and can control a giant if you know how to create enough fear and guilt in that person. Now, fear, I don't mean the fear of physical harm. Guilt works like this. My life really would be better if I hadn't met you. I don't have to say this to you, I just imply it, the tone of my voice, the contortion of my face, the sigh that is there. My happiness. Remember how gloriously happy I was before you came, and now you're here in my life. And this can be a parent talking to you. Did you know it? You've robbed me of my freedom, child. You never heard that? And the fear. The fear is this. If you don't do what I want you to do, now let me see, what is it that I want you to do? But if you don't do it, then the consequences will be your fault. If you don't do it and I leave, it's really your fault. But if you don't do it and I die, If you don't cover those hot checks and I go to jail, it is not my fault. It's not because I wrote them. It's because you did not cover them. After all I've done for you. Oh, there's 1,000 variations. You've got your own. And the problem is not just that we had it put on us. There are lots of us that became experts in putting it on other persons too, and you're looking at the former world's champion. And I want no more of that system, thinking and feeling, because it is self-defeating. It always comes back to get you. Guilt is not merely a concern with the past. It is a present moment negative emotion that is so destructive. One of my favorite stories is in the book of John. It's a story when Jesus went again to the temple, and as he was speaking, the Jewish leaders and Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery and placed her out in front of the staring crowd. It was not uncommon in those days. They placed her right out front where everyone could really look her down and know how guilty she was, how immoral she was, how much better they were than she. Although some of them had been with her, but they were better than she. Teacher, they said to Jesus, this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. Moses' law says to kill her. What do you say? And they were, of course, setting a trap, and if he said the wrong thing, then that meant that they could seize him and kill him too. And so he just didn't say anything for a while and stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. And they kept demanding an answer. And so finally he stood up and said, all right, hurl the stones at her until she dies. But only he who has never done a similar thing may throw the first. And there was a long pause, and then the oldest of them, meaning the wisest of them, walked away, and the others followed. And in a little while, Jesus was still writing in the dust, and he looked up and he said, woman, where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you? And she said, no, sir, they didn't. And he said, neither do I. Go your way and stop doing it. Neither do I. Now, you know that in the Bible, a woman always represents our feeling or feminine nature, right? It's their right brain, as modern psychologists would say. And what is being said here is, woman, or feeling nature, stop your reaction. Who has been pointing its finger at you? You have. You have been accusing yourself. You know, the most of our guilt comes not because we stand in front of a crowd who look at us and stare us down. It's because we stand in front of a crowd of eyes in us, of ideas that we have about ourselves that cause us to feel guilty and diminished and reduced. And the Christ, or the higher self, is saying, stop that. Where are your accusers? And I say to you tonight, where are your accusers? Where are they? They're not here. They only exist inside yourself. Even if someone in your life is controlling you now because they have the evidence of something that you did at a former time, don't buy that. Say to yourself, I'm not guilty. I did it. I may have done it. It's quite possible that I didn't. But I will not buy into the burden of guilt. I'm going to set myself free. The word, we understand what adultery means, sexual intercourse between a married person and someone else who is not their own spouse. But I submit to you that the word could also be adulterate, which means to make impure, spurious. Spurious meaning false, fake, counterfeit, sham, erroneous. Or inferior by adding extraneous or improper ingredients. And that is a perfect description of what happens to our spirit. When we are born, when we are that little boy child and girl child growing up, there's a state of purity that is there that gradually becomes contaminated or adulterated by the experiences of life that we don't know how to handle and that we improperly judge. How many children who have been doing exactly what nature requires when they were playing house or doctor, only to have their mother walk in at just the wrong moment and catch them and snatch them by the arm and take them home and stick them in the bedroom or perhaps even the closet for the terrible thing they did. The terrible thing they did? Terrible? Burden of guilt. And from that moment forward, sex begins to have, and that person's own body parts begins to have the connotation of the feeling of guilt. I recently was talking to a beautiful woman in her mid-30s that I've known for 12 or 13 years. I knew her when she married her husband. She has been going through a spiritual awakening in her life recent weeks, and one of the results of that awakening has been also the awakening of certain feelings, sexual design. She's married, but it scared the daylights out of her, and she couldn't even talk to her husband about these awakened feelings that she was having. And she called me and said, "What am I going to do?" And I said, "Enjoy." That's what you do. You enjoy. But I don't have the right to enjoy. Who said you don't? Where is that distant voice or the finger that was pointed? Where is your accuser? Somewhere back in the past. But this perfect self of you, this glorious one of you, has the right. It is not contaminated by anger and resentment and blame. Did you, in the dynamic between the accusers and that woman, pick up on blame and guilt, pointing their finger at each other, something that we do? Back and forth, back and forth. The antonym for pollute means purify or cleanse or clean, to redeem, to respect, to honor, to revere, to elevate, and to ennoble. And that's exactly what this process that we're involved in now is. It is the renovation, if you will. It is the reclamation of our true self, our higher self. It's bringing it back to the front and forward, beginning to believe in it and its feelings, whether they be sensual or sexual or joyous. Have you never not been miserable on a particular holiday because someone that you loved was not with you? And what right did you have to feel good when they felt so bad? People who feel bad impose the burden of guilt upon us, and we have bought into that package many times. Do you choose to join someone in their misery in less than what they really are? Not very long ago, I talked to a woman who is very bright, very talented. And I say this to you because sometimes it's possible to be intellectually brilliant and emotionally insane at the same time. Anger is to be emotionally insane. Guilt, deep-seated guilt and blame, is emotional insanity. One part of her was very bright and happy and uplifted about her life, but there was another part that said, "I heard, Jack, what you said in the lesson, and it was that I must stop blaming this person in my life, but I don't know how to do it, because the thing that he did was so terrible that I cannot forgive him." It's the unforgivable sin. The unforgivable sin is the thing, always it's not suicide. The unforgivable sin is what somebody did to me that I didn't want them to do. It made me unhappy. That's unforgivable, isn't it? Who said it was unforgivable? And so I asked her, think for a moment about what he did. And she said, "That's easy. I think about it all the time." I think about it all the time. Did you hear what I said to you? I think about it all the time. It controls me. I said, okay, now think about the worst thing that you've ever done in your life. And she thought for a moment and clicked into the worst thing she'd ever done in her life. I said, don't tell me what it is. Now, which is the worst? What he did or what you did? And she said, well, they're both about the same. Wow. About the same, aren't they? I can tell you that the worst thing you ever did and the worst thing I ever did is about the same. And if I didn't do the worst thing that you ever did, I thought about it. And probably didn't do it because I didn't have a chance. But I'm not going to feel guilty about it. And I'm not going to blame you, because if I blame you, then an amazing thing happens. I get locked into my own state of being. It becomes the law. It is the law of life. And I said to her, forgiveness is for you, not for him. And she said, oh? I said, you're not forgiving him for him. He may not change at all. I said, you probably are afraid to forgive him, because if you forgive him, you might have to live with him for the rest of your life, or some such thing. And she said, that's right. And I said, well, forgive him so that you are free. Then you're free to go or to stay, but you can do it from strength and with dignity. The sweetness of your spirit is there, and your joy will be restored. She understood. She said, may I come into your office someday when you have about an hour and a half, and we can help me to forgive? And I said, no, let's do it now. That's how long it takes. It may take you 20 years to do it now, but when you do it, you will do it now. It is something that you do. It is an act of releasing. It is setting the other person and yourself free from the consequences of their actions. And it is for us. It is not for them. Guilt does not help. It does not help us change. It does not help us grow. As a matter of fact, it prevents us from having the experiences that we have always sought to have. I can almost guarantee that a person who is filled with guilt and the consequent blame and judgment that comes will not experience a miracle. You are miracle-minded. You believe that it's possible for a power greater than you to do things for you that you could not do for yourself. Do you believe that? Well, guilt separates us from that experience. It's virtually impossible for us to accept our good when we feel guilty. Even if guilt is confined to one central area of our life, it is always there, like a time bomb ticking away. A few days ago, I noticed in one of the newspapers a story that was written as a tragic experience, and in a certain sense it is, but I will not buy into the idea of tragedy either. It's a story of a young boy up north on a hunting trip who accidentally fired a gun that severed an artery in his brother's leg, and the brother bled to death before help could come. And the story went on, quoting someone who said that that young man would have to live with his guilt all the days of his life. And I say, not so. Only because of his accusers. I wish he were sitting there on the front row right now, so that we could tell him that, no, you've had the experience. The shattering experience, now release it. You could not have helped it, nor can you go back and change history. But do not bring negative history forward with you moment by moment in the form of guilt. Do not live that experience 1,000 times, demeaning yourself, adulterating yourself. That is the prostitution when we permit the events that have happened to us to pollute our minds, our spirits, to immobilize us, and to keep us from being less than we were destined to be, less than we're capable of being. Well, how do you get rid of guilt? Well, one must see how devastating it is. I have never seen anyone give up anything until they saw that it was causing them some unpleasant consequences. You don't think we begin to grow because we awaken one beautiful Wednesday morning and look out a window and say, gosh, I think I will begin to change today. The second step is that we must come to understand that giving up guilt is a requirement of our spiritual growth. You see, we cannot change our ego self. We cannot rearrange it. As some psychologists tell you, you cannot bring the guilt down to an acceptable level and the anger down to an acceptable level. Haven't changed a thing. We're talking about putting off the old self. It's a process. It takes time. It's beginning to observe yourself. It is the willingness to give up your suffering. Remember, it's the negative self that suffers, that is afraid. It's the willingness to stop being identified with something that I am not and to gradually become identified with something that I have always been but did not know that I was. Wonderful, exciting, guilt-free, anger-free. You mean it's possible to be free of anger? Absolutely. It's possible. Why? Because there is a real self in us that has never been angry, and if we become identified with that self long enough and strongly enough, we will be like it is. We must put on that mind, as Paul said. To be free of guilt is God's will for us. Do you know that religion has given God a bad name? He said that God is the God of anger, and you are the poor, miserable sinner that was created in sin, and you're never to be worthy of whatever amount of good, and if you get it, it is because it's not true. And intuitively, you know it isn't true. It is also not true that we will ever be good enough to merit our good. It's not a matter of good or evil. It is a matter of just being. Does this little grandchild that I told you about earlier have to become good enough to merit the love of the grandfather and of the adoring parents? Absolutely not. Nor do you. You have never done anything in your life that separates you from the love of God, so stop feeling guilty about it. It's the guilt that separates, not the act. Often in our time, I hear the statements made about women who have, for whatever reason, had an abortion. And boy, the heavy trip of guilt that's laid out for that matter. And if this has happened, it happened. Didn't it happen? Don't feel guilty about it. Stop feeling guilty about it. Look back at the worst thing you've ever done in your life, the thing that you know that you're never going to tell anybody about. And God doesn't talk, you're not. Think about it for a moment. Now give yourself freedom from guilt. Are you brave enough to do that? If you are, it will change your life. But you can't do that unless you're also willing to look across the room in your mind to the other persons in your life and set them free at the same time from their own misdeeds, which may not have been misdeeds at all. Willing to love them without blame? Are you willing to take the consequences of your action and set every other person free from the imposed sense of responsibility that you've put on them since your childhood? Are you? Then you're just about ready to be born from above, from a higher state of being. The awareness that of myself, I cannot change myself. I'm powerless to. The admission of that. but to come to believe that a power greater than myself, an intelligence, a warm and loving presence. Do you think that baby is aware of its grandfather? No more than perhaps you're aware of the presence of God who loves you. I forgive myself for all my mistakes. I forgive all others. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. I lived my life the way I lived it right to this moment, to this very moment, and I have made mistake after mistake, and yet I have done some things that have been incredible. So have you. I cannot change that fact, and I will not be remorseful. I will be glad for each event. I accept it. Give me the courage to change the things I can. My negative reactions to evil feelings, guilt, shame, blame, that whole barrage of nonsense. Shel Silverstein, in his book, Where the Sidewalk Ends, wrote, "My rules. Well, if you want to marry me, here's what you'll have to do. You must learn how to make a perfect chicken dumpling stew. And you must sew my holy socks, and soothe my troubled mind, and develop the knack for scratching my back, and keep my shoes spotlessly shined. And while I rest, you must rake up the leaves. And when it's hailing and snowing, you must shovel the walk, and be still when I talk. And hey, where are you going? There are people in your life that have put all kinds of requirements on you, and you in turn have put the same requirements on someone else. Stop it. Control your world with love. Love them. Forgive them. Bless them. Confuse them. And guess what will happen? If you will do it, the whole world will march to you and want to marry you if you're single or even if you're not. You'll be amazed how many people want to make a perfect chicken dumpling stew for you, or sew your holy socks, or soothe your troubled mind. And keep your shoes spotlessly shine. You give up your guilt and your worry and your apprehension and your blame, and when you live in now moments with love, enjoying your life, you control your world in the most amazing way. Everything that you were pushing away from you and all the people that have moved out, moved back. Isn't that amazing? It's amazing. But that's the way it really is.
This concludes the lesson on Side B of tape number 2. Now proceed to tape number 3 for the continuation of The Formula for Success.